Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks, Sophia. Maybe we just give it, I think people are still joining. I can see that the numbers going up. So we'll just give it one more moment. Thanks. Okay, I think we'll get started. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. This is a P4G Seoul Summit official side event. My name is Nikki Gwilliam-Bahari, and I'm the Investor Engagement Lead at the World Benchmarking Alliance. So this session today is focused on investing in a just transition. Obviously, this is a complex but critical topic as it delves into how the world can rapidly decarbonise while leaving no one behind. So just before I introduce our range of fantastic speakers today, let me take a few minutes to set the scene. So anyone working in this space will have seen that the IEA came out with a headline-grabbing 1.5 degree scenario last week. And as part of this, as well as stating that new oil and gas exploration projects would need to stop this year, the IEA models also showed that there were sources making up global energy supply will need to radically shift. So fossil fuels, for instance, will need to make up just 1/5 of energy sources by 2050. This is a huge shift to today, which is actually where fossil fuels are 4/5. And solar, for instance, would become the biggest energy source at 20% of the global energy demand. Now, clearly, these shifts will have huge implications for the financial health of businesses, but also immense implications for investors financing these activities. But the focus today is also on the enormous impact that it will have on people working in the sectors. So to take some numbers around this, a UN technical paper on the just transition in 2016 stated that an estimated 30 million people work in support of the energy sector, and a further 1.4 billion workers have been identified as employed in sectors critical to climate stability. And of course, this doesn't even then cover the communities and households that rely on the workers for their livelihoods. So given this context, our view at the World Benchmarking Alliance is that it's crucial for businesses and investors to take into account this social angle when setting up and implementing strategies to tackle climate change. So of course, this concept of just transition is not a new one. It was part of, for instance, the Paris Agreement 5.5 years ago. But at least in the investment world, we haven't seen as much focus on this compared to, say, the accelerated integration of carbon data and the adoption of climate frameworks. It's not surprising, perhaps, because the social angle is often seen as more complex, making it harder to identify these high-level measurable metrics, which is what's enabled many investors to accelerate their recent climate-related activities. Despite this complexity, we're now starting to see an increasing number of investors recognizing the topics around just transition and how these can represent financially material risk and opportunities. We're also seeing some investors recognize that just divesting from a carbon-intense sector may help to avoid some of this downside risk, but this won't actually solve the transitions needed for climate and social challenges we face today. So this makes it a key topic for investors who are looking to focus more on sustainable outcomes, who are looking to contribute to the solutions, like those we're working alongside in the WBA Investor Alliance. I've been working with investors on these topics for over a decade now, and I've recently joined the WBA, mainly because I saw the value of having well-developed methodologies and publicly available benchmarks that really assess the most influential companies in the world on key topics such as this one. So later today in the session, you're going to hear from my colleague, Vicky Sins, who leads WBA's work on decarbonisation. She's going to present the just transition methodology and the team's plan to publish benchmark findings on 180 companies later this year. During the session today, we also have the honour of hearing keynote remarks from Sharan Burrow, who's the General Secretary at the International Trade Union Confederation, and later on from Rasmus Christensen, who works in Denmark's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Between these keynotes, we have a panel with valuable insights from Caroline Lemaire, who's head of the ESG analysis, engagement and voting team at Amundi, and Hunshan Jung, who's head of the policy research team at the Asia Business and Human Rights Center. So just to finalize my opening remarks, it's my aim for you to leave this dialogue not only feeling the sense of urgency in ensuring a just transition in this race to decarbonisation and net zero, but also so that you feel you have a more concrete picture of how investors can act on these topics and how benchmarks can provide a critical data set for many stakeholders so that we can influence companies' behaviour around this. So let me now turn to our first keynote speaker, Sharan. So Sharan is a passionate advocate and campaigner for social justice, for women's rights, the environment and labour law reform. She's led union negotiations on major economic reforms and labour rights campaigns in her home country, Australia, and globally. She's the General Secretary at the International Trade Union Confederation and also an ambassador to the World Benchmarking Alliance. Sharan, I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts on this topic and for getting us started in our session today. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you just remind me of the time frame? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you have 5 to 10 minutes.
Perfect. So, you know, there's no doubt that we have to tackle the climate crisis. We're on a race against time. It's that simple. And for us, you can't think about the climate crisis without thinking about the other interrelated crises we have to deal with. So even before the pandemic, we were indeed facing historic levels of inequality. It was creating anger through despair. People were on the streets because they couldn't live on the wages they were being paid. The labour market is broken, with 60% of workers being informal and the 40% in some formal contract, actually a third of them in insecure or indeed low paid and unsafe work. So when you think about that context and then overlay it with the climate crisis, which was already destroying lives and livelihoods, then there's no doubt that we need to look at the world of work and indeed our economic model with a very different lens. Overlay that on top of the pandemic on top of that, and you saw all of those fractures exposed as giant craters in terms of the way in which we manage our economies, the impact on people, the shared prosperity, and of course the damage to the environment. So we now need much more transparency. And of course, the World Benchmarking Alliance work is critical to that. So when you look at the behaviour of corporations and the destruction of shared prosperity because of the inequality, the destruction of the environment, and of course the resulting breakdown in the barriers with the destruction of our biodiversity and of course our health crisis, then this is the framework in which we're operating. So the trade union movement, knowing that we had to tackle the climate crisis, has indeed also the perspective that we need to bring everybody with us. We absolutely support disclosure in terms of stranded assets or the potential for stranded assets in the investment world, but we cannot have stranded people or stranded communities either. And in that context, we fought for just transition for way more than a decade in the lead up to the Paris Climate Agreement, where indeed it was enshrined in the agreement as a critical part of the contextual frame in the preamble. I think the concept is quite well established now. What we have to focus on is implementation. So what does it mean? It means that, you know, no government and no corporation can expect that if unions and working people are not at the table affecting just transition, people who are already scarred from that massive inequality or having lost their livelihoods in other areas are simply not going to trust that there's a secure future for them. So we need to make sure that there is. And what does that look like? Well, it first of all means that we have to ensure that there's a labour floor of rights and protections in all our areas of commercial activity. And all benchmarks have to look at whether or not workers are being afforded decent work, because that gives you a base security. You know what they are. They're the fundamental rights of freedom of association, the right to bargain collectively, the right to be free of discrimination, child and forced labour. But it's also about occupational health and safety. And of course, we also have to look at whether or not workers are being paid a minimum wage on which they can live, a minimum living wage, and then sharing prosperity through collective bargaining and universal social protection. If we don't have those measures in place, there is no capacity for us to affect a broader equality or indeed a sustainability where everybody is indeed committed to the journey we have to make. So having said that, that's the flaw. But every sector has to transition. And there are jobs in the transition. So we also should be saying to corporations, if you're an investor, or boards of corporations should be saying to their CEOs, do you have a just transition plan? Do you have just transition measures in place? And they're quite simple. They are, in fact, pensions for older workers. They are a bridge to pensions for workers who may be displaced, who are younger than the retirement age by agreement, voluntary retirement. They are income support, redeployment and reskilling support in order to make sure workers know that they will have a job, and indeed it's community renewal. No corporation can simply walk away from a community that has been dependent on them and has indeed helped them create their wealth without working with unions and governments where it's necessary to renew, to see that the community renewal, so the trust is there. So trust is at the centre of all of this. But if there's no transparency, if there's no due diligence, if there's no fundamental flaw of decent work through labour rights and compliance, then we're operating on a model of business that is simply exploitative for people and for the environment. So in this context, the Benchmarking Alliance is absolutely at the centre. It's hard, I know, to take all this data and to aggregate it into sharp points of transparency and understanding. But I would say this, corporations can't continue to just pick one bit, whether it's the Benchmarking Alliance assessment or whether it's any human rights indicators or whether it's indeed the Global Reporting Initiative, whatever framework it is. They can't actually just say, we'll take this bit and we're actually, making social progress or making environmental progress. And then we need a broader rule of law. We need to make sure that the global model of trade is indeed compliant. So WTO reform is critical, and we make absolutely we absolutely make it clear that that reform must include labour and environmental rights and standards as a base for a fair competition floor if we're to meet that deadline looming of 2030, whereby we have to make sure that we've achieved the SDGs, Goal 8, decent work, amongst other areas of sustainability and equality, and of course the environmental demand that we do more than 50% of the emissions reductions towards net zero by 2050. We do more than 50% by 2030. So just transition for us is critical, and it's all about the respect and the rights and the involvement of working people. And of course, in our case, that means their unions.
Thank you very much, Sharan. And I think you mentioned some very key points there about companies not being able to pick one part, but also that investors need to say to their boards that, and ask the boards whether they have a just transition, which is obviously a key leverage which an investor can take. So I do thank you very much for your time and your contribution, and also the ongoing support of the work and key input to the work of the WBA. Thank you very much, Sharan. So I think that sets us up perfectly, because we're now going to move on to our first presentation, which is from Vicky. So Vicky leads the WBA's benchmarks on decarbonisation, and she's here at the perfect time, leading in from Sharan's remark, to update us on the work and how the benchmark's progressing, so that we can really see when we're going to have this methodology and start to see the approach of companies around this topic. So over to you, Vicky.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Sharan. It's always very inspiring to hear you speak, because it makes us even more motivating to get this right. So thank you for that. Can I please ask Sophia to share the slides? Thank you. So you already heard quite a lot naming of the World Benchmarking Alliance, and I'm not sure if everyone's fully up to speed with who we are and what we do. So I'll quickly just do a brief introduction of us as an organization, and then we'll lead you into speaking around our climate and energy, social and just transition work. So the World Benchmarking Alliance is an independent NGO, and it was founded to build a movement to really measure and incentivize the private sector's contribution towards a more sustainable future, but also a sustainable future that works for everyone. So that's why we've identified 7 system transformations that you can see here on the wheel. And we believe that these are the 7 system transformations that need to take place in order to really put our society and our planet and our economy on a path to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And to turn these transformations into true actionable outcomes. And that's the reason why the WBA, and that we do that in close cooperation with our alliance, with over 240 members currently. And we develop a series of publicly available and free benchmarks to really assess and measure the contribution of 2,000 of the most influential global companies on their contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. We call these companies the SDG 2000, and I will explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But with these benchmarks, we really want to equip investors like yourselves, governments, civil society, individuals, and of course the companies with the information they really need to step up their commitments to contributing to this transformation. In doing so, we really create a system that recognizes leadership, but we also create a true accountability mechanism for those companies that lag behind. In 2023, we aim to have published a series of benchmarks of these 2,000 most influential companies across all these areas of the transformation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned already, the SDG 2000 are the 2,000 most influential companies. This doesn't mean they're necessarily the biggest in their size, but we mean that they're influential in their supply chains that they operate in. Some statistics, because I know that a lot of you would like these statistics, these 2,000 companies represent a revenue of over $46 trillion US. Why is that important? Because this is the money that needs to move. We really need to make sure that this revenue is going to be made out of different sources and different sources of income that they are today to really support the transformation. They also are headquartered over 80 countries, and here you can see some geographical spread. Why is that important? Is because this is a global transformation, and that's why we really need to make sure that we look at this from a global perspective and not from a Western developed country perspective. Thank you. Next slide. So today I will provide some more insight into 2 specific system transformations. One is the decarbonization and the other one is the social transformation. As already mentioned by Sharan, it's without a doubt that climate change is the biggest global challenge that we are facing today. And this will also be the one that will shape the way that we're doing business in the coming decades. links between the climate change and the businesses are becoming more and more important and evident. And decisions that the private sector as well as their investor make will impact the speed of this decarbonization that we need to see. The investor community really plays an important and pivotal role in assessing the credibility of these companies and really to challenge them and to support these corporations' response and their actions on this unprecedented challenge that climate change brings. We have, of course, seen increased momentum of these companies in setting net zero commitments. But the question is, do they really know what is needed to get on the right path in their respective industries? And we know that with less than 10 years to go until the intermediate 2030 deadline, we must ensure that we're advocating for true transformational change and not just incremental change. As part of the decarbonization and energy transformation, the WBA has published so-called climate and energy benchmarks. And these benchmarks will rank the performance of 450 companies. Oh, the presentation is gone. Sophia, can you put back the presentation?
Yes, give me 1 second, I'm sorry.
No worries, I'll just continue talking. But we will use we will assess these 450 companies on their transformation to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we use a so-called ACT methodology, and ACT stands for Assessing Low Carbon Transition. And it was developed by CDP in cooperation with the French part of the government called ADEME. This methodology truly measures the readiness of the companies to transition to the low carbon economy, because we truly believe that tackling the crisis does no longer require a rear mirror view, but we really need to look forward and what are the forward perspectives for crucial investment decisions, as well as to challenge and identify potential risks and opportunity. This is actually what the ACT methodology was designed for, and this is what the benchmarks do. So far, we've looked at the automotive industry and the electric utility industry, and both benchmarks are available online. And we are currently finalizing the oil and gas industry for publication in early July this year. Next to looking into the decarbonization and energy transformation, as said, it is also crucial that we look into the type of social transformation. We expect all the companies to respect human rights, to provide decent work, and to act ethically in order to really contribute to a transition that we said to leave no one behind. And that's why the WBA has developed a set of core social indicators that you can see here on the right in the red wheel, to really look into what is the common baseline understanding that we need to have of these corporations and what these companies need to achieve to really represent responsible business conduct. And this is what we believe will really underpin the potential of achieving the SDGs. Next slide, please. So as already mentioned by both Nikki and Sharan, it is without a doubt that companies have this critical role to play in the just transition. This, as part of our mission to build and measure incentivized business impacts towards a sustainable future, that's why we are developing this just transition methodology. Nikki illustrated the amount of workers that are dependent currently or are employed directly or indirectly in these sectors. So it is without a doubt that the private sector plays a crucial role. But next to that, the companies have also built communities around their operations that have benefited from the direct operations in their respective communities. So for these sectors in which withdrawal of these operations is a potential or is at risk, then it comes with a responsibility to really plan for these communities, because otherwise it will not happen. The transition will not be one that supports the leave no one behind principle. And that's why we will be assessing these 450 companies that I mentioned in the high emitting sectors on what they are doing to respect the rights of workers, the communities, and the most vulnerable as they work towards a low carbon economy. The methodology to measure this is currently being finalized, and we expect the final publication in the next couple of weeks. And this methodology consists of 6 indicators that will be used to really perform a just transition assessment. These indicators, is quite important to mention, builds upon the work of numerous organizations, amongst others like the ILO, the B Team, the Just Transition Center, as they represent a series of expectations that is placed on these companies by international norms and standards. And they really, it's the aim that it articulates what unions, business initiatives, and other actors are really expecting as a driver for the just transition. So you can see these indicators here on screen. So we really believe that the first 2 are they're really to look into how a company is actually starting to think around a just transition and their impact. So how is a company planning for a just transition for their workers and the communities that they're active in? And how is the company enabling and supporting the social dialogue and stakeholder engagement? Then we will look into how is the company engaging with their workers. So around how do they enable the green and decent job creation, but also how are we going to look after retaining employees or retraining and reskilling respective workers. Then we look at more of the external perspective, is how is the company looking into protecting social or contributing to social protection, because we believe that of course social protection is recognized as an internationally as a human right, and it is also in labor standards, in international labor standards, and of course a core objective in the SDGs. And then last but not least, we will look at how is the company advocating for policy and regulation supporting a just transition. We see that, of course, a lot of these companies are already quite active in advocating for climate policies, whether or not for the right climate policies, but we believe that this, of course, needs to be extended into including the support for just transition. So to summarize, what will this assessment look like? We're assessing these companies using the ACT assessments on their readiness to transition to a low carbon economy. And we will complement that with an assessment using the core social indicators, as I mentioned, to respect human rights, decent work, act ethically. And then we will add these 6 just transition indicators. We are aware that the majority of the companies are only at the beginning of their journey to contribute to a just transition, and therefore these proposed draft indicators focusing on the fundamental actions that are required by companies. The assessments will therefore distinguish between those who have already started on their path to contributing to a just transition and those who have not. Next slide, please. So we have developed these indicators by also collaborating with the setup of a Just Transition Advisory Group. You can see the members here on slide, and they're also on our website, to really make sure that we align with existing initiatives and disclosure principles, but also to make sure that we build and complement on existing work. One thing it's important to mention is that we also work closely together with the Climate Action 100+ to make sure that the development of their just transition indicators is going to be as far as aligned as possible with our just transition indicators, to make sure that we really drive for the impact together. So this year, what's on the plan for 2021 is already mentioned by Nikki. We aim to perform the assessments using the methodologies that I've mentioned on the previous slide for 180 companies based in the automotive, electric utilities, and the oil and gas industry. And these results will be ready later on this year. And then from 2022 onwards, we're really going to integrate the scoring into an overall ranking. And that will be for the full 450 companies. As mentioned already, these assessments, we aim to use this as a really critical mechanism to hold influential companies to account, but also to show them the road that is ahead of them and what really needs to happen in taking the next step into a just transition. Last slide, please. So then, of course, what is important is that with this ambition that we've set ourselves, we hope that this sets a precedent for decarbonization that really truly leaves no one behind, because that's the only way we can make this a successful transformation. And we continue to join up with leaders in the investment community to really build our collective action on the just transition. And we therefore invite you to join, if you've not had already, our alliance and other industry leaders on driving this transformational change. We also align with financial actors and policymakers, civil society, and the companies themselves to ensure for systemic action that needs to happen. The WBA aims to have the results of the 180 companies and our just transition assessment ready by COP26 this year to really put the social dialogue at the heart of the discussions. We really invite you to join us, to support us on that. And we thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to your continued engagement with us. So thank you so much, and back to you, Nikki.
Wow, great, thanks. Thanks very much, Vicky. And just taking away from that, the kind of view of having something that has a critical look forward for investors. I think you really highlighted that, the idea that the benchmarks there can really focus on what a carbonisation pathway looks like, whilst also bringing the core social safeguards within that. So thank you, Vicky. That was a good kickoff in terms of understanding the methodology and the next steps for the benchmark. So Vicky's going to join us again at the Q&A session in the panel, but we're going to move now to the other panelists and hear about how their organizations are working on this topic. So let me first turn to Huanshan Zheng. Thank you very much for joining us. Huanshan, you're the head of the policy research team at the Asia Business and Human Rights Center. So that's an NGO focusing on policy change via academic research and consultations, and you're also a part of the WBA Alliance. Thanks for joining us. It's very good to have your perspective here today. Maybe to get us started, could you spend a few minutes telling us how your organization understands and advocates for a just transition? Thank you, Huanshan.
Thank you very much. First of all, it is a great pleasure to be invited for this meaningful and timely side event on the occasion of the P4G Seoul Summit. And also, I would like to thank the World Benchmarking Alliance for convening this event. I'm delighted to see that distinguished guests shared and will share their insights today. I'm Huanshan Zheng, head of policy research team at Human Asia, and which is and also working at Asia Business and Human Rights Center, which is housed in Human Asia. And I also work as a steering committee member of the European Union delegation to the Republic of Korea. And I'm in charge of business and human rights training at the Korean National Human Rights Institute. So my focal point pertains to human rights due diligence and human rights impact assessment. And therefore, my team and I work collaboratively with the various stakeholders at home and abroad to ensure respect for human rights in business operations. And I have also advised state-owned enterprises, private companies, and governments on matters related to business and human rights. And we are recently working on materializing a myriad of recommendations for revising the national indicators and guidelines for business and human rights in South Korea. In that regard, even if most of us are not the experts, to be honest, regarding the environmental issues and energy transformation, but we are currently working on this. And so we should really make the recommendations requested by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, which is the National Human Rights Institute in Korea. And in this respect, we are referring to just the transition methodology and the CHRP methodology. As an ally of the World Benchmarking Alliance, I mean, most recently, as Nikki explained about that, most recently, my organization has become an ally of the World Benchmarking Alliance for disseminating the CHRP methodology and integrating them into the national indicators for human rights management and human rights impact assessment. So for that reason, my organization is working with the governments, inter alia, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, and working on recommendations to be released during the second half of this year. And those recommendations will be delivered to the relevant ministries. And most likely, these recommendations will be integrated into the business performance evaluation on state-owned enterprises. In Korea, every state-owned enterprise in total, there are more than 988 state-owned enterprises. So under these circumstances, in the process of making recommendations for ESG reporting and for how to integrate ESG criteria into the currently ongoing national policy of a human rights impact assessment, we find that just the transition methodology is providing further opportunities from which South Korea can possibly carve out more transparent and systemic criteria for improving policy coherence. Even South Korean President Moon Jae-in has publicly called for expansion of ESG-related business activities. Even he and the government publicly set 2021 as the year for the expansion of ESG management and entrepreneurship for all. And against this backdrop, since last year, the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy announced that it developed what is called the Kesc Index to enable the assessment of the efforts of sustainable management based on Industrial Development Act. And the ministry plans to give certifications businesses that satisfy the standards so that they can keep up with the global companies and investors demanding sustainable management. And however, as everyone knows, this should be highlighted enough. The environmental issues and climate change and climate justice impact each and every human right, civil, political, and economic human rights. And so this interconnection is surely inescapable. That's why our organization is working on the environmental issues at the same time. So we are trying to combine business and human rights environment issues, dealing with them all together. We suppose that while reporting on ESG, companies and other stakeholders should not be only focused on how to make them look compliant or clocking themselves in that with the statistical data only. Since, as I mentioned earlier, according to the Kesc Index published by the national government, what's controversial about this is that one Korean multinational is complicit in the human rights abuses happening in Myanmar. So they collaborated with the military junta in Myanmar. But according to the Kesc Index, they ranks in the top 4 in terms of social, even if social is almost synonymous with the human rights, albeit with the fact that they are complicit in those negative human rights violations in Myanmar. So we should stop companies clocking themselves in that with the statistical data only to make themselves look compliant with the ESG reporting. Every stakeholder inter alia, private companies must take into consideration human rights in this respect, hoping that WBA and just the transition methodology can make this possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hwan Shang. And it's, yeah, I think it's very important. You've brought out a key aspect of the next stage of what Vicky was talking about, which was then the actual use of this data, of the frameworks you mentioned there, using the corporate human rights benchmark from the WBA. And it's obviously really key that allies and wider actors use this information. So it's fantastic to hear the work. And I know you've just literally come off a call talking about that. So we look forward to hearing more about the way that that's being integrated in Korea. So let me just maybe turn back to you one more time, Hwan Shang, before we move to Carolyn to talk more on the investment side. Hwan Shang, could you tell us, do you see, or how, to what extent do you see that investors can play a role supporting the work that you do? Obviously, you're focusing more on the government side, but how do you see investors playing a role in advocating or moving this topic? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the roles of the investors and financial actors have a crucial role, definitely, to play in facilitating the huge shift towards a low carbon world for sure. As everyone might know, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, SFDR, in the European Union imposes mandatory ESG disclosure obligations for asset managers and other financial market participants with substantive provisions of the regulation effective from 10 March 2021. Likewise, by excluding some of the companies causing negative impact on the environment, those investors can play a bigger role in revamping the current situation and shifting the trajectory towards a more sustainable world. In this respect, investors should increasingly request companies to disclose climate-related risks and labor practices and the like. And contributing to a just transition is in particular synchronized with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris goals as well. So in Korea, there is, even if it is still nascent, some of the investors and banks join this momentum. A growing number of state-run organizations are seeking to prioritize an anti-coal drive in selecting banks that will handle a combined 34.1 billion won in state funds. 34.1 billion won is equal to $29 million. So KB Financial Bank, the holding firm of Kookmin Bank, is one of the huge banks in Korea, has set up a long-term objective whereby the group's investment portfolio will reduce the investment in carbon-heavy projects via increased investment in solar and wind, among other renewable energy generation sources. And even so, Metropolitan Office of Education said September last year that a new criterion will be added to evaluation standards to be met by banks that apply to manage each 1 billion won fund. So unfortunately, due to the abrupt outbreak of COVID-19 making economy stagnant, the national government and other investors currently cannot deepen this momentum, at least in Korea, further more than expected though. So to make a long story short, definitely the roles of the investors and the financial actors should be highlighted enough, and they should really contribute positively to enhancing this sustainable management. And they can possibly request the companies causing negative impacts on human rights and the environment and governance to change their strategies, not abusing human rights to the maximum for their benefits, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you've brought out two key parts there of the role that investors and other financiers can play. So the allocation of capital, obviously to new projects. I think you mentioned there's some investment, particularly to solar or other projects, but also the influence that they have. So that sets us up perfectly for Carolyn. So she's our second panelist to present today. So Carolyn, obviously coming from Amundi, which we have a lovely display behind you, so it's nice and clear. Maybe just to kind of repeat, so Carolyn is the head of the ESG analysis, engagement and voting team at Amundi. So Amundi, I think many will have heard the name before, but it's a French asset manager with 1.7 trillion of assets under management, making it the largest asset manager in Europe, but also one of the 10 biggest in the world in terms of AUM. Amundi is also one of the investors who are part of the WBA's alliance. So it's great to have you here. I know that Amundi recently launched the first Just Transition for Climate Fund in April and is exploring other ways to work further on this topic. So it would be very interesting if you could tell us more broadly about how your ESG analysis or investment stewardship works links to the Just Transition. Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay, so just first, where we come from. So the social cohesion is something which is very valuable for Amundi. We have two main pillars when regarding engagement. It will be climate and social cohesion, even if we are engaged in some broader aspects sometimes. So going on the climate, what we figure out is that when we engage on the climate, it's a very complicated story. And you just have, for example, 1 hour or 2 hours with top management or a board member. And, by the time you end up with the technicalities from the climate, the social aspect was not enough from our perspective. So we decided to have a full fair transition engagement dedicated to that. And so that's the first step, which is on the stewardship angle. And the product angle, as we have a large range of climate product, what we did start, and we did launch a first range with a first fund, but it's just a methodology that can be applied in different underlying asset classes. So the thing is, we want to make it concrete, and as an investors, we are deemed to invest in a big, broad, a large range of sectors and companies. This is the way we work. So we need to have to have a methodology to assess how a company could do the fair transition. So we did try on a scoring system to have some signal to assess how the company could do it, and it's linked with our engagement effort. And on this, what we are doing, and as Vicky said, for the timing, we are at the beginning of a journey, because nobody has really did is transition yet, and not the fair transition. We did start to speak of the fair transition to the company. How important is it, like two years ago? But still, you know, we need to raise awareness around that, and we need to explain very concretely to corporates. You know, there are people who are very concrete. What are the angle they have to work on it? And so we did start with this scoring. With the data we already have. We would like to have better data, and I think that what you are doing is what will at some point give us better data, but for the time being, we need to start acting, so we need to use whatever we have today. So we did a scoring system which is focused on just transition, and at this stage is more about assessing the capacity of the company to do the fair transition. And I think we will go back to the what Sharan was telling us, is also about looking at the way they are, how they have the kind of relationship they have with trade unions. So we have 4 pillars we are looking at communities, because obviously communities are very important, and maybe this is something, an angle which is quite difficult for companies to take fully account, because they don't have full responsibility of communities, but they are part of local communities. When they shut down a site, they need to take this into account, and it could be very key for the acceptability of the climate change. You have the workers and the employees angle. Obviously, everybody think of that, but it's really important to make the transition, because yes, the energy transition is creating new job, but the thing is, between the formal job is a new job, how you get there, they are real people. It's not just numbers. You need to train them to do the path, and you have the clients, because you need to have some affordability of the new product, like a cheap green energy is something important. You can't have, you know, because we want to have in mind that we need to fight against poverty. And the last but not least, but because it's really important, we have also to look at the company, how they pay their taxes, you know, how is it public, they participate to the public knowledge of how to do this fair transition. So this is how we are assessing things. And again, is a capacity way for the timing. We think it give us comfort about how equipped is the company, but we are still they still need to do the job. So this is really something that we are doing, like assessing. And one of the key elements we are working on, and we did start last year, is a specific engagement stream to have this discussion with the company, because to tell them what is your view, where we want them to give us more information in the annual reports, doing some more reporting, answering to this kind of questionnaire, and also to work and have some, some every year, some targets to because it's the way engagements work. We set as a subject, we discuss with the company what we want, even if it's just influence, but what we wish them to go, and we set up a little bit and we discuss with them, because sometimes they confront us also with their reality, and this is a way that globally we can move, because at the end of the day, the real target is less who we are and where we stand. The real target is real economy, is real people moving to get the energy transition, and we have to keep it. Our role is just to do the influence, and sometimes from year to year what we stand there is we need to act, but every year we also have to adapt to reality, to adapt our the way we are working on what will be the more impactful manner to do it. So
thank you, Sharan. Yeah, I mean, you've brought up so many key topics there, but I think it's obviously really important to have you saying that, and we know that as well from other types of engagements that have happened, for instance, through the Climate Action 100+ and other engagements. We know that investors do have influence over the board and over the senior management, as you say, not to be too prescriptive, but to kind of advocate or put forward certain targets and ask for transitions to happen. And I think what you said there about setting a target and then working with the company and providing them very concrete information is obviously key. And I think to take away a quote from that you don't have all the information at the moment, but you need to start acting. And I wonder, just before we move to the Q&A wider session, maybe Karen, you can just add in for us. You've said there we need to start acting, and investors yourselves feel the need to start acting on this topic. So it seems that Amundi are taking some kind of leadership role in this space. Do you see the investment world more broadly taking a wider role, focusing more on these topics this year and over the coming years?
Definitely, we are trying to, we want to launch a collaborative engagement around fair transition. Will be just additive to the all the climate angle we already have, because we think it's so a complicated topic and we need to focus on specific question. We have the feeling that we need to, when we meet company, we need to meet like twice, one on the climate and then on the fair transition, because sometimes it's not exactly the same people who want to speak to. So we are trying to do this collaborative engagement because we think it will be much more powerful than just us. And we see some traction around that. A lot of people, at least in Europe, but even in Asia, are interested in having this collaborative engagement and discuss between peers how to do it in a more efficient way.
Thank you very much, Karen. So I'm just looking here, and I think we have it's a good moment now to move and bring Vicky back in as well. So just in terms of kicking off the Q&A session, so maybe I can turn back to Carolyn and Huanshan first. So we've talked here about the kind of need to move and the actions that are already happening, but obviously we have referenced that there are some challenges around this. So maybe if you could just emphasize again or kind of focus more on what challenges have you faced in your work around these topics, and I guess linked to that, what would you like to see change to really enable your work? Maybe Huanshan, we can start with you. Thank you. We don't see Hunshan, so maybe we'll just move back to Carolyn at the moment. So yeah, if you could expand on the challenges you faced, what would enable your ability to move forward, and then we'll come back to Hunshan.
Okay, I think the first thing is time, because as you were mentioning, the shift is just major, and the way a company is working, it's a big entity, and if you need to assess better what are the impact to be better equipped to deal with it, you need time. And the thing is, as everybody knows, we are in a timing where we need to act, because the climate, we need to urgently act. So it's a little bit of the difficulties there is that it's a new concept. Company can move, but they need time to think of it if they want to do the right things. And then, so I think that's the first problem. And then it's, part of it, it's a new concept, sorry. Part of it is a new concept, but the thing is, it's some things that they were already doing for most of them. So it's some things that sometimes part of the job we have to do is, yes, it's a new concept, but I mean, somehow, don't worry, it's not worry, but you can act because part of it, you're already doing it, and you have to do some specific adjustments. But I mean, you already have you have the trade unions, you have the link with the communities. This is not new, and you just have to use them to somehow be in a collaborative mode to find some solutions. So I think this is a part of time and education needs, and making them feel that it's not impossible, it's possible. Because you want the system to move. To do that, you have to make people comfortable that they can succeed. If you put pressure and they will see, anyhow, we won't succeed, they will not start to move. So that's what I see.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, so I think what a key thing to say, yeah, that making it kind of leveraging what already exists, but to find solutions around this, and reassurance, which I think Vicky would probably echo, so we'll come back to that, but we'll move to Hunshan. But I think echoing the idea that having companies understand what needs to be done, and reassuring that there is a solution, and that there is a way that things can move forward, I think is crucial. So maybe we'll come back to that with Vicky. But Hunshan, could you tell us from your point of view, what are the key challenges today, and if there's anything that would really enable this work to move forward? Thank you.
So many of the challenges we see in the space of environment environment and climate changes, because they're still making it centralized, and we are always looking for global solutions. And so we need to sometimes look at the local solutions, the bottom-up approaches, and participatory. So more attention and interest is highly necessitated as well. As explained, most of the policies and approaches to climate change and justice, SDGs, etc., are the bottom-up. For that reason, the importance of those is top-down, sorry. And so for that reason, the importance of those is not widely shared among varied stakeholders, especially citizens and people out there. So that's why education matters in this respect, for sure. But additionally, data and analysis on the contribution and performance is clearly needed to show who is better, which one is more compliant. The question of data and accurate information in a manner that is accessible for the different groups should be raised as well. So basically, we need to complete and better data and access to information to enable people to make decisions. And I think it is absolutely critical that governments, and as well as business corporations, including certain enterprises, they are more transparent in terms of what they are doing and what they are not doing. They have a number of portion proof of factors that ESG disclosure and all that. But I think this disclosure is different from the right to information. So because we have a stake in how governments decide the businesses and climate actions, so we should be able to demand that information in a manner that is needed and efficiently. And regarding ESG reporting and sustainable development or sustainable reports, which indicator is the most convincing? This question is ricocheting around in Korea right now. I don't think it is only happening in Korea, but that's why I think the World Benchmarking Alliance also has created and invented their own methodologies as an alternative to tackle these issues and confusion among the stakeholders. In 2019, John Ruggie even published his research detailing how the indicators regarding ESG reporting are cherry-picked to make companies look like high-performing ESG compliant companies. Once again, getting back to the question I made, which indicator is the most convincing and reliable and inclusive? Which indicator or benchmark is created resulting from the inclusive engagement with the various stakeholders? I suppose the government needs to show their legislative initiative and make relevant policies and guidelines in mitigating any confusion on this. But as I already explained the case in relation to the Kesc Index as well, if the government doesn't really have the rigid momentum to implement the better ways of sustainable development goals and the sustainable management, it would be creating some loopholes in that regard. So so I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hwan-Chun. And I think both Carolyn and Hwan-Chun have referred to something, and there's a question as well in the chat, which I kind of links to a question that I had for Vicky, which was, so obviously what we're hearing here is that the development of the methodology, which often sounds like a kind of black box process that just happens in a room and that's kind of hidden, obviously that's a really key step, and that process, of what to actually ask companies and how to define that in order. The question in the chat is about how to bring in competing priorities, and they've mentioned here communities, but that could be from other stakeholder groups. And Hwan-Chun's mentioned the need to have kind of bottom-up views. So maybe Vicky, we'll go to you just to hear about, how do you cope with that? Has that been a challenge in the process in terms of developing that methodology? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Yeah, absolutely. It's to answer your question. Yes, that's always a challenge, and not just for just transition. That's for any methodology we are developing. But I want to make it clear is that any methodology that we develop is not a black box process. Everything we do is in the public domain, and it really we live around certain core principles as an organization. So first of all, we build on existing work. So if there's already existing organizations that work on specific initiatives, we try to make sure that they're included in the work that we do, because it's not our aim to reinvent the wheel. We really want to make sure that what we do is addition to what's already out there. And that's why we rely on our alliance, which I mentioned is 240 organizations, but in the alliance, we have strong voices of standard setters, of disclosure principles, but also we have very strong representative of the civil society organizations, which really bring in those different perspectives on what it is that's how do we make sure that the methodologies that we develop are actually a reflection of societal expectations, right? And that is a very broad term, because it is different from different communities, different regions. So we really make sure that we have different representations throughout the methodology development process. But then after that, which is as important, we really make sure that the methodology is open to public consultation, and that public consultation really is there for a period to gather proactive input from industry representations, which of course we've seen through the industries that we said. So we have a lot of oil and gas companies providing input, electric utility companies that provide input, but also making sure that we have indeed community representations that provide their perspectives from their specific regions into the methodology. And because these companies have the ones that we're trying to head, the SDG 2000 or even a subset of that, these are operating in such diverse regions and communities that there is always this challenge around, okay, we want this to be able to be measured because we want something measurable, but it also needs to make sure that it represents, you know, the global scale that the company represents. But we really make sure that the process is there to reflect that all voices are being heard. The methodology that we develop needs to be aspirational. So it really needs to be something that we believe drives this transformative change, but it also needs to be actionable, because to Caroline's point is like, yeah, if we just put out a North Star and nobody sees how to get there or how to achieve it, then there is no point. And so there really needs to make sure that it's actionable, and it really speaks to the responsibility and the accountability of all stakeholders in this change. So it needs to provide a roadmap for companies, and that needs to be an aspirational roadmap, but it also needs to speak to the role of the other stakeholders. And so the findings and the outcome of this needs to show that this requires a multi-stakeholder approach, also not in the development process of the methodology, but also then the actionable outcomes from the scoring and the benchmark results.
Thank you, Vicky. So I'm just conscious of time here. We have a final keynote speaker who's going to be joining us, and I see Rasmus is on the line. We're just going to wrap up now to the panel discussion. Thank you very much. I mean, there's so many more things that we could cover and dive into, so maybe we can take that offline. Maybe I'd just like to do a final quick round from the three speakers, just in a few words and kind of a brief overview. We've talked a lot about methodology developments, of actions that are already happening, and I really want to come back to that concept of investors. So just briefly, how do you see investors as, you know, playing a key role, a critical role in driving this transition? So maybe shall we start with Huansheng? Anything to add on that final comment?
Oh, thank you very much. So since I usually work with the national government, so I need to highlight more the roles of the investors, financial actors, though, but again, get back the role of the national government. But this time I would like to highlight the role of the pension funds, since the pension funds are the state-owned enterprises in this respect. At the same time, they play a role as an investor. So on the note, pension funds can probably play a crucial role in facilitating and driving just the transition for sure. And pension funds should take a lead to make exemplary cases of a sustainable investment, since they deal with huge amount of investment across the borders. Their influence can be positively utilized to make huge contributions to sustainable management to mitigate the negative impacts resulting from business operations on the environment and human rights. Yeah, thank you.
Great, fantastic. And so, Caroline, do you want to have a final word on that? How you see investors driving this transition?
I think it means driving the money towards the just transition and the energy transition. But secondly, is more about engagement, because at the end of the day, we want the normal people, you know, the global economy to shift. And then we need to be very clear about how we see it, to bring the information again to the top management and all the stakeholders, is what are our view, how we see the thing. Because usually, even if you are engaging with top management of big companies around the world, sometimes they get some confusion, because there are so many people at them, so many things. They need a little bit of a clear and very open-minded discussion about what is important, what we are asking for. So as an investor, we need to be clear. We need to ask them something precise, definitions, and being pragmatic, demanding but pragmatic, and using this kind of questionnaire, which are the same for every company, so we can ensure comparability.
Great. So investors need to be precise, demanding, and pragmatic. So those are key takeaways from Caroline. Vicky, over to you. Final words on how investors can drive this transition and how you're seeing this next step. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. And I think Caroline put it very well. And then, of course, she's the investor, so she can speak more of what she can do. But I think to that point, we've seen over the last couple of days what investors can do in the climate space when putting in votings, supporting a certain mission. So I think it already speaks to very powerful tools that the investors have in hand. But it is very much also to really hold up a mirror to these companies that, you know, the social dialogue and the social transition cannot be used as an excuse to not support the climate transition. So these two need to go hand in hand, and there's great opportunity for the both of them to really make this a successful transformation. And for that, indeed, we need to make sure that we have comparable measurements, indicators. And I think that's what Caroline spoke to. And this is what we aim to achieve. And we aim to put a sort of a baseline results out there, as I said, in the autumn of this year. And we really encourage to really put this as a sort of a drive for collective engagement forward. And again, we invite anyone who wants to join us on that mission.
Thank you. Perfect. So we're going to obviously huge challenges that we're talking about, but some kind of pragmatic next steps around that. So thank you all for your contributions. I do hope that the audience feels they can leave the session, and that's how I feel, is kind of more sense of urgency around this, but also that we've actually really explored the role that different stakeholders can play, including investors, in reorientating capital, as well as utilizing their influence in a way that supports the just transition for people and planet. So I'd now like to turn to our final keynote speaker, and I think we can see Rasmus Christensen is on the line. He's the Head of Department for Green Diplomacy and Climate from Denmark's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Rasmus, thanks for joining us. So we've focused today, Rasmus, on mainly on the role of businesses, investors. We've heard a little bit about what government actions are doing in Korea from Hwan-Shan. But a key factor overall in facilitating this over the coming years and months, let's say, will be how governments and other public actors shape the operating environment. So firstly, I know that Danida, who's the Denmark Development Corporation, is a supporter and a funder of WBA. So we know that, you know, a key supporter of the benchmarks we're developing so that stakeholders can have this data and influence over company behavior. But also we've recently seen that Denmark are playing a leading role in the IEA's Global Commission on People-Centered Energy Transition. So I'd love to hear a bit more about how this commission is exploring the social and economic impacts around these challenges. And it's fantastic to have you here today. You're going to be closing out our session, so we look forward to hearing your insights. Thank you, Rasmus.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you for inviting me to this this webinar today. And thanks to everyone for really, I think, the well-prepared and open-hearted discussion. I think there was a lot of food for thought in the previous interventions and the discussions. I think all of the interventions really sort of highlighted the importance of a just transition in the race to decarbonize and achieve net zero for our economies. And I think we've also learned how benchmarks can provide this kind of critical data that stakeholders can use when they want to influence company behavior, as well as, of course, the role of investors. And all of these topics are also highly relevant in a Danish context. Maybe I'll start, Nikki, with the question you asked about the new Global Energy Commission on Just Transition that was established by the IEA, the International Energy Agency, and which Denmark is currently leading. The Commission will really try to identify and examine some of the most important economic and social impacts caused by the green transition. For example, it will look into challenges of employment, but also energy access and affordability, as well as public support and social inclusion. In doing so, the Commission will try to bring together both government leaders. I think we all recognize the paramount importance of governments in this matter, but also prominent scientists and experts to explore exactly how we can empower citizens around the world to benefit from these new opportunities, but also navigate some of the challenges that inevitably results from a clean energy transition. So we very much hope, of course, that this commission can play an important contribution in securing an inclusive global energy system that maybe to a much higher degree than before put people at the heart of the clean energy transition. But we also recognize that we have to act now, both if we want to fight climate change, but in doing so, we can only succeed if we're able to sort of inspire and include people in a socially balanced way. The reason why Denmark sort of raised its hand to both participate and lead this commission is that I think we do have a lot of experience to offer when it comes to just transition. We have been, transitioning our especially our energy sector, but also our society at large for at least the last 20 years. Of course, it comes with challenges. But I think we've also managed to do it in a way where we create new jobs, new growth. When we have foreign investors here and they're interested in the issue of just transition, we often take them to some site visits. For example, some of the old shipyards that had to close down more than 20 years ago, which are now sort of wind power testing facilities, complete transformation. I personally think that this one shipyard in particular that is really a success story in the sense that more jobs are now created. It employs more people than it did in the heydays of its role as a shipyard, and that simply has to do with the growth of renewables and clean tech. Same goes for some of our ports on the west coast that used to be heavily focused on oil and gas exploration and the oil and gas industry, which is now at a very rapid speed sort of transitioning into hubs for offshore wind, which again generates a lot of employment, growth, etc. And also at the company level, which is very much what I guess we have discussed today, we have some, I think, very good examples. Most people are probably familiar with the case of Ørsted, which is now today the world's leading developer of offshore wind parks, wind farms, and also ranked, I think, in its sector as one of the world's most sustainable companies. But it's important to keep in mind that wasn't always the case, and they have gone through a very rapid transition over the last 10 to 20 years, where they started out as a heavy fossil fuel based economy with a lot of jobs internally in the company tied up to that, and then gradually transition into what it is today, a much more valuable, a much greener, and also a much more future-oriented company. But it's not just the governments, it's not just the companies. I think the importance of civil society should also be recognized. I think in Denmark we have been fortunate that labor unions and organized labor have taken a constructive and played a very important role in this process, in understanding the opportunities of this and help governments and companies steer sort of the process in a way where you both promote change, which is inevitable. We need to change if we want to fight climate change, but do it in a way that is socially just. So these are some of the experiences that we certainly hope and would like to share with others. We do that bilaterally, but also by leading this IEA commission on just transition. We also talked a lot about investors today, and I perfectly agree. That's a very important force for change in society. Certainly in Denmark, we've seen the pension funds in particular been instrumental in investing in the green transition, in renewables, and that has also provided some of the necessary capital to do this very rapid transition in a cost-effective manner. That also means that that it has not really been a heavy burden to the Danish economy to do this. So partnerships with the private sector is certainly important, both the investors, but also the companies. In Denmark, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, the government established 13 climate partnerships. The purpose was basically industry by industry to sit down with the private sector and say, okay, the government has a 70% reduction target in 2030. How are we going to get there? The government cannot get there on its own. It can regulate, it can do a lot of things, but without the private sector, without civil society, there's no way we're gonna reach this very ambitious target. So the companies actually help, or the private sector help, to formulate realistic targets, realistic solutions that could be brought into play through agreements with the government that will really help curb emissions. So co-create and develop solutions together. And I think that has been a very valuable experience. In many ways, you could say that the P4G is a more of a global initiative that tries to do the same thing. Heavy emphasis on partnerships as a motor engine for promoting a green transition. But of course, in all this, accountability is also important for governments. Here in Denmark, we have a climate law where the 70% reduction target is not just some lofty ambition by the government. It's actually enshrined in law, and Parliament. There's a very elaborate process for how Parliament is going to keep the government accountable to those targets. But accountability is also important for governments. Certainly, the Danish partnership with the World Benchmarking Alliance, I think, is an important step. Benchmarks can credit industry frontrunners by recognizing and rewarding companies that contribute to sort of real impact for people, the planet, and shareholders. But of course, they can also inspire those who are perhaps lacking behind, and ultimately serve to hold companies accountable for when they sort of fail to deliver on commitments. And I think that is important as well. So just to conclude, let me also thank both the P4G, of course, and the World Benchmarking Alliance for arranging this event today, and thank everybody for your active participation, and rest assured that Denmark remains a very strong supporter of both the innovative public-private partnerships that can engage private enterprises in realizing the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. So with those words, thank you so much for attending today. It was certainly for me a pleasure to listen into and participate. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rasmus. So we're just going to close out here, and I'm going to just recap on 4 things that I've heard from, I think, of all the panelists, kind of key themes that come out. So the need for a multi-stakeholder approach. So the fact that it's government, civil society, investors, and companies. So that very much aligns with what we're trying to do at the WBA, but I think it's fantastic to hear that's kind of the mindset of everyone approaching this topic from their different organizations. We need a clear, precise, demanding, but pragmatic approach with companies. And we need to work with companies to show that this is not impossible. So co-creating solutions. And I think the final one there that Rasmus just commented on was the need for accountability mechanisms. And that can be holding companies account in different ways and encouraging that race to the top, as well as looking at and working with those that are not yet setting those ambitions. So we're going to round off there. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your remarks. We very much look forward. I think this is more of a kick-off conversation with this group rather than the conclusion. If anyone from the audience wants to get in touch with any of us and look at other ways that we can create more action around this, as we say, we're building up to COP, but it's not all just about one event. It's kind of a key movement that we're working on already with many different partners. So look forward to hearing from more of you. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.